Hi, in our previous video, we looked at the anatomy of the heart. Now we take a brief look at the histology of the heart and some physiology of the heart to answer the question, how does the heart do what it does? In the movie Inside Out, people's emotions and reactions are tiny beings who live inside people's heads, and they coordinate one's moods and reaction. If you do not look too deeply at this concept, it is cute. Therefore, we shall employ a similar concept to explain cardiac histology and physiology. Think of the heart cells like the trolls from Troll Village in the movie Trolls. Only instead of working to protect you from the Bergens, they protect you from necrosis and death. Morbid, I know. The heart is made up of two types of cells, or trolls. The contractile cells, which make up the majority of the heart, kind of like the happy, huggy-go-lucky trolls in the movie Trolls. And the autorhythmic cells, which make up a small portion of the cells, kind of like Branch in the movie Trolls. Do not think about the metaphor too deeply. The contractile cells are responsible for contracting, and when they contract in unison, they allow the chamber to which they belong to expel blood onto the next part of the system. The autorhythmic cells do not contract. However, they are still important because they can produce and conduct action potentials which are needed to initiate contraction of the contractile cells. So they work together. The autorhythmic structures of the heart make up something called the conduction pathway, which is the pathway along which action potentials or electrical activity is conveyed so that it is able to reach all the chambers and all the cells of the heart to ensure coordinated contraction of the cardiac muscles, and therefore that the heart is able to do what it wants to do and what it does best, which is supply your body. Conduction pathway are the sinoatrial node, a small bundle located on the right atrial wall near the opening of the SVC. Of the autorhythmic structures, it generates action potentials the fastest. Next is the atrioventricular node, a small bundle of special cardiac muscles located at the base of the right atrium, at the junction between the right atrium and the interventricular septum, hence the name atrioventricular node. It is normally the only point available to ensure that electrical impulses from the atrium, usually the sinoatrial node, reach the ventricles. So it is very, very important. Next are the left and right bundles of hairs, a tracts of specialized cardiac muscle cells, which are located along the interventricular septum. They extend from the AV node to the tip of the ventricular chambers and then curve around along the lateral walls, and they are the third fastest to produce action potential. Fourth, the Purkinje fibers, which are branches which extend from the left and right bundles of hairs and ensure that all the ventricular myocardial cells are able to receive the electrical activity. Normally, the SA node generates an action potential under the control of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and it usually does this the fastest. This is important because although all the other structures also have the potential, yes, it's a pun, to generate their own action potentials, their intrinsic action potentials are usually suppressed by that which comes from the SA node. Therefore, the electrical activity which is conveyed throughout the heart originates from the SA node, and eventually this activity will result in the contraction of cardiac myocytes at the rate determined by the SA node. Therefore, it can be said that the SA node normally sets the pace of the heart. In other words, the SA node is normally the pacemaker of the heart. Now, I've been talking about action potentials, and you might be wondering, or you might not, what exactly is an action potential and how does the SA node and all the other structures generate it? Well, an action potential is different for the different cells of the heart. An action potential is different for the different cells of the heart. Autorhythmic cells have a different type of action potential from the other cells or contractile cells. In this video, we shall look specifically at how action potentials are generated in autorhythmic cells. In autorhythmic cells, more than 5 different types of channels participate in the generation of an action potential. The funny sodium channels, the potassium channels, the transient calcium channels, the long-lasting calcium channels, and the sodium-calcium antiporters. Now listen up, this is a bit important. In autorhythmic cells, there is no refractory period like the one which exists in skeletal as well as cardiac muscles. After an action potential has been generated, hyperpolarization takes place as a result of the potassium channels which open and allow an efflux of potassium out of the cells and into the ECF. The difference is in autorhythmic cardiac cells, these potassium channels drift closed. In the first half of pacemaker potential, the slow closure of the potassium channels, in addition to the opening of the funny sodium channels, ensures that there is slow depolarization of the cell membrane of these pacemaker cells. In the second half of the pacemaker potential, the funny sodium channels close and the voltage-gated transient calcium channels open. Wow, that was a mouthful. This allows an influx or incoming of calcium and therefore further depolarization of the membrane. This happens until threshold is reached, at which point an action potential is achieved. When the threshold is reached, the transient calcium channels close and the long-lasting calcium channels open, which ensure a rapid depolarization through the massive influx of calcium of this membrane. When the peak of the depolarization is reached, the falling phase of the action potential begins with the activation of the voltage-gated potassium channels, ensuring the efflux of potassium until hyperpolarization is complete. When hyperpolarization has occurred, depolarization can begin again with the activation of funny sodium channels and the closure of the potassium channels. One could say that the different channels stay in their lane and interchange only when necessary. Some people could really learn from these cells. This coordination and interchanging of activation is known as the membrane clock mechanism, and it ensures that an action potential is generated. In addition to the membrane clock mechanism, there is something called the calcium clock mechanism. Now, the calcium clock mechanism is another mechanism within the same cells which is completely independent of the membrane clock mechanism, but often works together with the membrane clock mechanism to ensure that threshold is reached. In this calcium clock mechanism, calcium is spontaneously but timeously and repeatedly released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, increasing the presence of calcium in the cytoplasm. Now, this calcium is used by the sodium-calcium antiporter channels in exchange for 3 sodiums, so 1 calcium in exchange for 3 sodiums from the extracellular space, and ensures a positive net influx of positive ions. So what does it do? It takes 1 calcium from inside and exchanges it for 3 sodiums from the outside, ensuring a net positive ion influx. Together, the membrane clock mechanism and the calcium clock mechanism are collectively known as the coupled clock system. Wow, that was a lot. Okay, so just to be clear, the coupled clock system is kind of like when Bridget, the calcium clock, and the trolls, the membrane clock, became a team to defeat Chef Bergens. In this case, to defeat hypoperfusion and its consequences by generating an action potential which will eventually cause blood distribution. The trolls wanted to defeat her because she hunted and cooked them, and they are the main characters in the movie, literally named trolls. Bridget was also in the movie. She lived independently of the trolls, and she was one of the Bergens and is therefore intrinsic. And she wanted to defeat the chef because the chef was honestly horrible. The goal just happened to coincide. Although the trolls probably could have defeated the chef alone, together with Bridget, they were able to achieve their objective faster. Another example is any superhero collaboration. For example, in Crisis of Infinite Earths from DC, when the Green Arrow, the Flashes, Supergirl, the Legends, Batwoman, and the Supermen, yes, there were multiple, Black Lightning and their support crews collaborated to defeat the Anti-Monitor. Or, if you like Marvel better, when the Avengers got together to defeat Thanos. The point is this: the individuals involved are independent, but may have the same ultimate goal. In the case of the membrane clock mechanism and the calcium clock mechanism, these two systems form the coupled clock system, #team name, to ensure that the threshold is reached and therefore that an action potential is generated. So wow, that was a lot. So we will stop here. But I would like to know what happens to the action potential after that. Well, to find this out, please join us and watch our next video. We hope to see you, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you enjoyed our video. Thank you. Bye.